Hi, and welcome to another awesome software cooperative meetup. This is our last meetup of the year, and we are on the last part of the book that we've been reviewing, Companies We Keep, Employee Ownership, and the Business of Community and Place by John Abrams. So this is part 5. If you're interested in this, make sure you check out the other uh, videos we put out, and we'll have a mind map and a bunch of notes put up as well. Hope you enjoy. It's been a good book. Watson?
Thanks. All right. So we're going to try to get through chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10 is pretty small. Thinking like cathedral builders. Essentially, what this means in this chapter is taking the long view. Um, so essentially, cathedrals were built in such a way to where they may take 100 years. So someone working on a cathedral may not see it actually come to fruition. So having that mindset is one of the principles, major principles for the South Mountain Company. So let's try to get through this. Um, so what does it take when they're talking about cathedral building? One of the, I guess, the concepts is how they affect the community that they're in. And so we'll be getting into that a little bit, and as well some other things. But the long term view is you have the actual business, but you also have the environment that the business affects, and so that's the you got to take the long view in order to have a long lasting effect. So the the community that uh, SMC, South Mountain Company, was founded in is called Martha's Vineyard, which is a pretty affluent community in Massachusetts. And so, like what it says here, Martha's Vineyard was overwhelmed by its own desirability and prosperity. Land values are rising, community is life changing. Most people are acutely aware of the changes, but our political leadership has not formulated an effective collective vision of the future. Instead, our posture remains defensive. We act as if we are under siege, weakly trying to fend off the inevitable. Now, what they're talking about is really the community has a certain identity. There's certain small businesses in that community. And as the community gains in value, bigger companies, um, interests that have, more um, resources, able to purchase, move in, and the effect on the community is um, maybe the families that live there. I can't afford to live there anymore, even if they were, upper middle class. Middle class gets replaced by upper middle class, gets replaced by very wealthy. Also, the businesses change and they become uh, less local. And so they wanted to combat that. So they were having a series of meetings to try to figure out, as a builder, what they could incentivize and promote and facilitate that would try to keep the identity of the community the way it is. So um, that their own, say, kids can buy property or live in that community without having to leave. So they created an kind of a set of meetings. So here they say we assembled a collection of ideas that guide us and inspire us and chart a course of what we like to make a difference. And by the end of the session, they identified 8 crucial areas: achieving political unity, creating the Vineyard Institute, promoting adequate and appropriate housing, preserving and enhancing rural character, supporting new traditional economy, making a transportation system that works, committing to environmental stewardship, maintaining cultural traditions. These are things that, um, if you remember, um, one of our other chapters, they have I think they called it the triple bottom line. You have the regular, profit motive. That's one of the bottom lines, but the other bottom line, other two have to do with, your effect on community and then your own like craftsmanship and things. So these would be hard to measure on a traditional bottom line, but as goals for, um, like that would be for like maybe a higher purpose and what they cared about, you would measure it on one of these other bottom lines. So they had a meeting. General idea was these principles. So how do we bring those principles to life? Let's see here. So let's go into here. This long view. And what, yeah, certain quotes like this one: making new landscapes and shaping new communities takes 25, 50, even 100 years. That's really what you would think about, with a, like if as a cathedral builder. Um, Big problems often don't respond to short term bursts of energy. Problems take on a different cast when we put them into a long term perspective. Hillis points out that difficult problems become impossible if you think about them in 2 or 5 year terms, as we usually do, but they become easier if you think in 50-year terms. Right? So, this type of thinking is really meant to be contrasted with uh, quarterly meetings of your usual business, where it's all short-term profit decisions. So being able to think in a 50-year, um, plan would be something, if that you could do if you're not beholden to shareholders, people who are owners of the business entity that don't work in the business entity because they want to see short-term profits. So all of this is, you know, um, coming into like one accord. So thinking like cathedral builders whose work would not be completed in their lifetimes has become our seventh cornerstone principle. Right. Some ancient cathedrals took centuries to build. Their builders had endless social, political, economic, technical, and thematic factors to contend with. The work continued as the cast of characters changed. The master builder died, wars were fought, regimes changed. These remarkably complex undertakings somehow continued. The perceived rewards were great. Another thing, if you go back to our other books, um, the mutual aid book where they talked about um, the development of some of the cities in middle um, the medieval Europe, and then also the medieval guilds book. You may remember that these cathedrals and architecture in some of these cities or towns, city states, they were not developed from top down. Like they were developed within, um, like one or more guilds working in unison over a long period of time. So they weren't really commissioned. Uh, let's go on here. So the author took a sabbatical and was really musing on some of these problems, also writing this book. He was reviewing some of the things in Portland. This is a basic assumption about business is you can't responsibly invest without majority control. What would it be like to have a deep and trusting partnership without control? Control is a really old model. What are our deeper assumptions about how business has to operate? So that really thinking about control and investment. You might think of somebody like Warren Buffett, who his whole strategy is kind of spearheaded the idea that someone investing into a company, they ought to, and if they have the best way would be to invest enough to where you can influence who is the who are the leaders who are part of the leadership team in the company. So he would invest enough to be placing people on the board, placing managers there, of course investing enough to even interview them and decide if they're really good managers, and then he would do a buy and hold strategy that way. But it also, some would say, incentivizes short term um, profit seeking. Any questions so far? Comments? So let's go in here. After watching transitions for more than 2 decades and hearing reports from others, I've come to the conclusion that everyone is a leader, just as everyone is a designer. And that's from the Master Builder chapter. If they are brought to a seat at the table, the problem I see is the abrupt way in which the change usually takes place. The owner sells to the employees, and suddenly they're the owners. If the legacy begins as part of the early organizational planning, it can happen gradually. So it's a continuum rather than an event. This allows time for training, for the development of decision making and leadership skills, for the formation of social bonds, and for the emergence of collaborative management systems. So this is about that whole transition. And again, thinking of how when you're reasoning about power within a company, oftentimes the company's built up in a hierarchical fashion originally, and then it's time for maybe the owner to retire or they want to transition. And then so do they just hoist all of that responsibility on the employees? And he says, kind of obviously not. So they started thinking about this 10-year plan, and he was thinking about how to, when he's going to retire, how he's going to pass on. So again, this is again the cathedral thinking, thinking about what the entity is going to look like as the founder leaves and how to do that. So again, you really need to um, have some type of transition plan. Basically, you're going to have to uh, train or really put people in decision making roles and let them make mistakes so that they can organically grow into owners. All right. So let's close this down. So this is all going with the cathedral building. So a big part of kind of branching out. Again, this book is about their evolution and then the ideas that emerged, and deciding what to focus on and what to kind of outsource. They were very interested in um, kind of sustainability and renewable um, energy, like it says here, energy conservation and renewables. They were really, with lots of meetings and reasoning about this, they really thought that was one of their long-term goals. How would they do that? Again, they're builders. So is there anything that they could do that they can incorporate into the building of homes and communities that would be more sustainable? And so they decided, hey, let's go ahead and make, I guess this thing is called the red arrow lamp. They started developing that as an idea, a resource efficient lamp and lighting fixtures. Right. So they had to outsource some of that or whatever. So this, again, this goes into this long term thinking of that goes along with the principles that they cared about. Now, uh, they, with that outsourcing, um, eh, there's this reoccurring theme in the book of the whole concept of like cooperative of cooperatives, or trying to organize with other interests. That they could be cooperatives, they could be other businesses that are employee owned or maybe not. They have the same types of long-term goals that you have. And so how do you organize along those lines? They were part of this thing called the Cambium network. And they met once a year for 3 days, and they basically debated about the things that worked well for them, things that didn't work well. And they said, like they say here, their encounters have always been characterized by blunt honesty and unbridled sharing. So one of the things I thought was interesting from here was the idea again of transitioning into employee ownership. You may, what I've run into, and then the author seems to think the same, it seems to be more of a left leaning view. Um, and more right leaning would be more hierarchical. Well, within this network where they were having all these debates, there are people, whether you're left or right, you run into the problem as a small business of what you're going to do when it's time to retire. And through this um, meeting and being exposed to people that don't really think the same way as the author and some of the author's friends, they're able to have this story here. So one of my best moments occurred a year or so back, my 50th high school reunion. This is a small town, Ohio, affluent suburb of Cincinnati, very self-satisfied and very, very Republican city. The or suburb, I should say. The event was surprisingly pleasant. Everyone mellows with age, even me. I was approached by an old nemesis, a very hard-headed right winger with whom I used to argue every question from race to social security. Johnny approached in peace. I thought, you might be interested to know, he said, that Oscar, I guess his brother, and I, oh, yeah, his brother, and I sold the family business to the employees. I was aghast. This was an old company, not large, but profitable. The classic situation where none of the children were interested in keeping it going. I asked all the skeptical questions, and to my amazement, Johnny gave all the right answers. Oscar wanted to sell to a larger company that would doubtless have paid more, but John argued that this would doom the firm. Eventually, it would be hacked up, their fathers and their grandfathers' life work destroyed. Besides, he said, these employees knew how to run things since many had been with them for decades. The two brothers signed a 10-year management contract required by the bank, but after 4 years, it was obvious they weren't needed, so the bank agreed to cut them loose, and the employees were managing themselves. So this is a success story of being not really just walking within your own circles and your own echo chambers, but getting into other arenas where you're debating and showing that things like cooperatives can work. Because people are going to run into this problem when it's time to retire. And then at the conference that was at earlier in the year, that's really what the whole thing was about, was employee retirement or owner retirement type situations, and trying to that's really the biggest uh, um, event that triggers employee ownership. More employee ownership, uh, or companies transition into employee ownership when the owner retires through kind of a stock ownership plan, than other forms of employee ownership. So that's that chapter. Any questions, comments so far?
Well, I think it's interesting to see how the motivation differs. I mean, the outcome is similar, but you can tell, right? It's like I was waiting. Well, so there's something about, yeah, the employees, right? They are the ones that should have a say in keeping their jobs and maybe running things as they should. But that's not part of the equation. It's always what's best for the outlook and needs of the owners. I think it's interesting, right? If some people, let's say, more of a right wing leaning person, I mean, that will be the type of conversation that you will be having with them. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, right? It's like you could have that conversation so different, right, with somebody that is a little bit more, more like, let's say, progressive views, right? It will be very different, but ultimately arrive at similar outcome. It's almost like know who you're selling to, right? So
Yeah, 100%. This would be a good rhetorical question to ask um, people who are more, you could say, business minded, or they have their baby that they've been working on, whether it be large or small. Like, what are you going to do when you retire? How do you see it living on beyond you? And that could trigger, these types of discussions, just like I was here, where, it's an option to, I mean, do you think that the employees would know how to run the business? And do since they've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years? Or do you want to give it on up to some hedge fund that's going to hack it up? Hey, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, and that's what I like about this whole cooperative movement. The assumption is, though, that there's some sort of human values. I mean, what I kind of noticed, the worst of capitalism, the people who play it are gamers. They really are not very, they don't have deep morals or aspirations or care what happens. I mean, and that's the problem. When that happens, they want to ring the bell as high as it can get the numbers up or whatever, and then don't even think about what that means. So if that's the case, then they would sell it to a hedge fund because the numbers will be higher and they win or whatever. I mean, the game they're trying to play. But if there is an assumption that there are other values, like this book is talking about, the multiple, what did you call it earlier, the three bottom lines, yeah, the multiple, if another one of the bottom lines is we care about our children, we care about the future, we're proud of our work and we want it to live on, then you can leverage that to have the kind of conversations you're talking about now.
Yeah, I was saying that conference um in April, the employee ownership cluster conference, it was quite interesting because there were people there that were some of the co-speakers, and then also people in the audience. They had businesses, and one story, I want to say that they were basically like a boutique glass company or something like that. And you know, they were, I don't know, it was like 30 million or something valuation, and 50 employees or something, 50 to 100 or something like that. But it was really kind of a craftsmanship type business, very artisan. And the they really didn't want to see the bit the they took pride in their work, and they knew that even they were saying they would make a whole lot more money if they sold to a hedge fund. Evidently it's hedge funds that buy small businesses a lot. And they really they really didn't like, because they're going to retire regardless, right? They really didn't like um the idea of the craft part, the art part of what they were doing to get run into the ground. Um, Now it seems that someone who didn't build something from the ground up with their name on it and all of that, they were hired in. Yeah, they're not going to care. This whole book is really about ground up building. It doesn't really mention. There's a few. No, I don't know if there's any examples of some where it wasn't built from the ground up. Um, so I think that part, there's still a pride component. It seems like there is an ego component that's a big motivator. Like this one, this exact story was the same story as one of the owners in that conference. Uh, so yeah, but when you think of, you know, these other stories, Enron or whatever, all these horror stories, they're not trying to, they don't really care. I agree. Anyone else? Let's go over here. The business of place.
The mission part
Mhm.
in chapter 8, there's
Mhm.
it seems like it's blended in when they're talking about the legacy and stuff. There seems to be something with the employees that are there, and they're there because they uh, are saying, like, I guess, the impact on community and whatever else they're doing, and they believe in that, and that would tie in with them taking over. So there's like some shared direction that everybody wants. So that now you have, of course, the cooperative side of like decision making and stuff, but they're not, at least from what I can tell, there's like an underlying piece that's tied together.
Yeah, he that's a reoccurring theme in the book. It's not a top down, here's the vision. It's meetings like this assembly where, what all do you care about? Everyone here. Let's start doing our priorities. Let's see what is it that we're passionate about. And then it grows from there. It doesn't come from the top down. That So that one is like this hit, the South Mountain Company for sure. This one is a top down that still turned into employee ownership.
It
Uh,
seems like it was, I
mhm,
almost want to just call it luck that the top down. So yes, for the
mhm.
ones where they're already talking and getting people's input, that makes a little bit more sense that it transitions. But it seems like here it it was it just happened that what the top down, both the people at the top were doing, people believed in enough so that when it was going to transition, that fit together. But I don't know that if you had a company that people didn't like really believe in the mission, that it would end up being sustainable.
Yeah, it's what's funny is when we're just talking about pure employee ownership, this is like 80% of the situation or more. It's not, it's like more, it's like 90%. The employee, the owner retirement plan, those retirement plans, I want to say ESOPs. So the employee stock ownership plan, but there's a retirement plan that's behind it. That's like a tax plan where the owner retires and it's all tax free and the ownership transfers to employees. That's some ridiculous amount of responsibility for employee ownership. Like it's 90% or something. It's more than that, I think. And it's this story. It's small businesses, but it's this story. But starting with all employee ownership is by far, in the United States as of right now, it's the minority. So this is I'm only saying that is like, it seems like luck, like we're saying, but this is a strong motivator is what the point is. It's a big motivator. So yeah, there's a whole national nonprofit that they facilitate employee ownership any way possible, but that's the most successful way.
It seems like if you want what you're doing to continue past when you stop, that you should start trying to find people that are passionate about what you're doing in addition to the other, like getting the input.
100%. Yeah,
If you
that's
realize that,
what the book's about. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I think it's going to help just if you're doing in general where it's not employee ownership. You're probably you're going to be better off as a company. But if you're really wanting to do it, then you need to be thinking like this. I don't think you could just say, I want it to last, so I'm going to turn over the employees. Like they may take it and go, I'm going to make the business last, but then they do something completely different. And it goes, it's fine, but it's no longer the same business.
Oh yeah.
Or-
Well, it could
or
fail
whatever.
completely is
Yeah.
one of the things within the book. Like if they're not trained to do it and all this stuff, 100%. Yeah. It's just, there's a counterintuitive truth here though. Forgetting the guy's name, but if you are some type of researcher or nonprofit that all you wanted to do was maximize employee ownership in the United States, and you only have a certain amount of resources and time, and you wanted to, your biggest success stories would be facilitating this. That's the counterintuitive thing. We're reading a book about a cooperative and all this other stuff, right? And he's like, this is the best way, starting from scratch and everything. That's what we are sympathetic to and all that. But this is the story that is like the 90% case. Now, if you want to facilitate a democratic organization, this is not the case. This ends up being hierarchical. And like how we were saying from the Richard Wolff, you can have employee owned, employee managed, and employee directed. This ends up not being employee directed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. This ends up being like all the problems with democracy. People are apathetic, they don't vote, they're not participating and all that. This has all that, but they have the ability to, but they end up being you'd be lucky if it's even employee managed, right? It's probably going to be it's probably going to be directed top down by probably the owner. They're going to facilitate a handoff to someone who's probably going to be a professional manager, but the employees are going to be able to vote them off the island basically, but they won't. And that a manager is going to appoint that, director, let's say, and board. They're going to appoint professional managers, right? Who they have a vote and everything too, but the employees, of course, they're going to be the majority, and they could vote them, but they didn't grow up in a democratic environment. So you could think of, like, say, a credit union. Everybody can vote that has some money, but nobody does, right? For the direction of the credit. I say nobody, but the vast majority don't. So it's the problem of apathy within democracy. So if you don't grow up within a cooperative, it won't be democratic. It'll be a republic, and there will be apathy. Does that make sense?
So what's the role of then, organizers or, leaders in the company? I mean, yeah, if you've never, I'm exaggerating, right? But if you've always been have the blinders on, right? It's like you're just going to keep doing that unless there's some incentive so I guess it comes down to whoever are the folks that kind of spearhead having the conversation in the company, or maybe not. Maybe it's actually the owners. Full stop. No. We're even going to start this conversation and trying to sell it to the employees. It's not really like employees starting to talk to each other. Oh, well, maybe we could buy this, even if ultimately it's a lot of the current owners that are going to drive that forward. Yeah, to me, it's so important and so interesting how you do that, especially because in business culture and everything is so hierarchical, right? So how do you even start developing those muscles, right? It's tough, I guess, if you've never done it before.
Yeah, 100%. Jeff?
Yeah, so especially like you just said, if you've never done it before, I haven't had the chance to do it, but I always want to find out more about places where it's sort of in the air, like in the Emilia Romana region in Italy, where 30% of all businesses are worker co-ops, or in the Mondragon area, places where you would grow up with that as part of the culture, which we don't have. So it's if no one's talking about it, makes it a lot more difficult to figure out how to do it.
Yep.
So what's the role of unions? Because this is like a small businesses, which, probably, I don't know, the union is not even that much of an interest or idea. But I wonder if there's businesses that are a little bit bigger and have some organizing, structures. I'm sure that this process is is very different, right, at that point. I guess.
Well, Mondragon has unions. So you can have, so if you were to think about, okay, so there's representative governing, so a republic, and there's like direct democracy, everybody voting on everything, right? Or when I say direct democracy, there's also really, like, you could say an assembly. Everyone gets together and you could say consensus or some type of, but everybody's in the room, right? Versus a republic. This situation is gonna start out as a republic. They're gonna do that. They'll go that route, and then when you have that, it opens the that opens the door for like a union to have more value for their employees. I say employees, the employee owners.
Yeah,
It's
which
like,
is
hey,
it's interesting that you're
yeah,
an employee, but you still need a union per se. Yeah, I guess like just organize, have groups,
yeah,
because you're gonna have different factions, I'm sure.
it's the problem of republic versus assembly democracy. So yeah, if you're in a republic, the top down rule by, you know, all types of different, you know, you could be propaganda, divide and rule. They can like all these nefarious styles, um, or you know, so you end up being, hey, let's all go to the other, let's all get together and have our private conversation away from the representatives that we've all got together and voted for, but they're not representing us, you know. So, but yeah, Jeff. I don't know if that was an accident, Jeff. You were raising your hand. All right, we'll go over here. Committing to the business of place. So this is all about the local. Tom Kelly, CEO of the industrial design firm IDEO, says in The Art of Innovation, inspiration often comes from being close to the action, being close to the action. That's part of why geography, even in the internet age, counts. New ideas come from seeing, smelling, hearing, being there. It's why people still go to museums to be inspired in the presence of the original artwork, although a digital image may be easily available on their home computer screen. Asking questions of people who were there, who should know, often isn't enough. It doesn't matter how many astute questions you ask. If you're not in the jungle, you're not going to know the tiger. Um, again, this whole chapter is about kind of them getting more focused. You know, there's the idea of we want to help everyone, but where are we the most effective? And this local versus global contrast, you wish there was cooperatives everywhere in the world and that you could just say, copy us and let's do this. But how effective are you? And also, you got to remember that there's the outside forces encroaching on your space where you are. And so this chapter is about committing to local. And so that's what they did with Martha's Vineyard. They started going really back there. So let's do this, beyond global to local. So every community has businesses and institutions that would, if gone, fundamentally change the character of that place, right? So this is that concept of you have businesses in your local community that kind of give the identity to that community. They're part of what gives that identity to the community. And then when you start having the national and international businesses that come in, it robs your community of its identity, which is, you know, it's going to have a long lasting effect. It's really going to, it's like, you know, strip mining the community or something. It's like taking the elements out. Maintaining core business is critical, but it's only at the beginning. As Mountain local commitment has developed, I have become curious about the potential of local economies to serve as an antidote to the negative consequences of globalization. As we probe into all things local, we must also look outward. Events beyond our shores will always have significant local effects. We need to understand them as they relate to relocalization or we are like ostriches with heads in the sand. As we struggle to understand and correct that which we cannot fully control, we can invest at once in that over which control is more direct, the process of localization. Local enterprises, the local enterprise has different aspirations and different constraints. Worker-owned firms, social enterprises, community nonprofits, community-owned corporations are tied to the communities in which they operate. They have greater accountability. And that is key points there. And the people involved are part of the community. For these reasons, such enterprises are more responsive to local, social, and environmental concerns, and they anchor jobs and reinvest locally. Now, this subsidiarity. I want to say, I almost want to say that he made that word up, but I don't think he did. Subsidiarity and federalism. A good frame of reference is the principle of subsidiarity, which proposes that matters should be resolved, decisions made, and responsibilities accepted at the lowest possible level of organization, the level closest to the people affected by the decision. This term is used mostly in reference to governments and churches, but it extends comfortably to businesses and social organizations as well. It is simply a preference for the most local decision making and economic activity that is adequate and appropriate for a given task. If we apply this to any small town or region, it means that the more food, energy, and other essentials we produce, the more investment we access locally, the more control we exercise over our economic institutions, and the more political decisions we make at the local level, the better our community life will be. Right? So our community will be more responsive to inhabitants more responsible for its fate. It's just like an employee-owned business. If people who make decisions are at the people who are also bear the consequences of the decisions, perhaps better decisions and better economy will result. This is some principle of locality, you could say. Let's see here. The opposite. So business philosopher Charles Handy uses the word federalism to express similar ideas. Federalism, or the distribution of power between a central authority and constituent units, is a more familiar concept than subsidiarity and an integral part of our country's governance structure. There is constant discussion about what is appropriately federal jurisdiction, what is under the purview of the states, and what is properly local. Adjustments are made. The concept of home rule, or the right of a town or city to enact laws that are primarily municipal and do not violate state law, is well understood. So this is federal, and it just makes you think of the Federal Papers, Alexander Hamilton, so on and so forth. So, all right. So this is talking about a combination of different entities for change. Found it interesting. So in the absence of big changes in a big place, perhaps big changes in a very small place can be a substitute. One avenue towards such change is the collaboration of three types of interdependent entities: democratic, place-based small businesses, local governmental agencies, and charitable nonprofits that are dedicated to specific geographic regions. So those three, they're saying, could be a way to leverage, I want to say power, but the ability to make change locally, and because they're more aware of the problems that happen locally. So small businesses are kind of a breakdown of the three. Small businesses committed to a locale have a natural interest in creating a better business climate. The people in those companies, employees want a better place to live and raise their families. The businesses can act quickly and decisively, and if they're able, if so motivated, to share the profits they earn. So, like, just talking about a local small business is not saying that they're cooperative. It's not saying anything. It's just saying they're local. Well-run local government can provide a broader platform through which to connect a particular business or undertaking to the citizenry. Government generally has a longer view and slower pace than business. That would be really something to ponder. And then private nonprofits like church or ecumenical associations, social service agencies, conservation organizations, housing groups, support groups, environmental groups, and a host of issue-oriented alliances and coalitions can afford an even longer view, filling the gaps where government is unable to act. They facilitate volunteerism and effective citizenship. As we live longer and healthier lives, more and more of us have the time and inclination to participate in helping to solve our social problems. So you got those three, and then of course you got the something that's in between a for-profit activity and a nonprofit, and that would be more of a, you could say, well, they're saying South Mountain, but like a cooperative. Any comments so far about these three as being kind of a three or four as being kind of an agent for change for the local, right? This whole thing is saying you have an advantage when you concentrate on the local. Most likely, if you have some type of long-term view and purpose driven, it's probably going to be tied to local first. But what do you all think? Mhm. I found this interesting. Bill McKibben, the author of Deep Economy, says small farmers spent 20 years spreading the idea of organic food. They were persuasive. By the turn of the century, sales were growing 20% a year, which was enough to attract the attention of the big growers who quickly took over the business. But local will be harder to co-opt because Del Monte and its ilk simply can't grow different food in every market. If they tried, their economies of scale would disappear. Local steps far enough outside the current conventional economics to represent a real challenge. It's an example of another handover into employee ownership. In the Mad River Valley of Vermont, Betsy Pratt, the owner of the beloved ski area, Mad River Glen, was ready to retire and sell in the mid 1990s. Locals were worried that the character of the storied place would change under the new ownership, and Betsy wanted to sell to skiers. Someone suggested a cooperative so that the skiers and townspeople to whom the area means so much could maintain and operate it as they wished. A local group organized and began to sell shares for $1,500. They were unable to raise the full amount, so Pratt gave them an interest-free loan for 5 years, and the group bought the area in 1995. The debt has since been paid, and the price of their shares has risen. No one can own more than 4 shares. There's no profit sharing. Profits will go back into the area. And it's another example of an investment in community. Mad River is an essential part of the valley, and its employees, town people, and users are at the helm. Is another example of a handoff, right? And then they have some examples of some problem solving of having to rebuild something, and they ended up handling it. So there are 1,900 owners of the Mad River. Wow. So we have that chapter talking about locality, and really this last chapter is really a review, so we don't really have to go too much over it. I will say this appendix, if you haven't looked at the book, the SMC ownership particulars, the employee ownership transition process, this was really good. This reading list, whole bunch of books on employee ownership. And one of the a big theme in the book is or a challenge for employee ownership and democratic facilitation, all that, is meeting facilitation and consensus decision making. And it has a kind of a primer for that as well. This appendix is really good. So that's really, anybody have any comments? 8:05.
Fantastic, walkthrough. I really want to just read this one. So yeah, I'm glad that we were able to stop and go through all of the topics and the questions.
Yeah, it really was. I found it more enjoyable to go, 1 or 2 chapters each time. It seemed to stick a bit more. I think what for this book, what lends itself to that is it overlaps with the theme of the meetup group and us and everything a whole lot, so it's kind of easy. It was kind of easy to do that with this book, I thought.
For sure, there's some like more abstract or ideas, not connecting with the literature, but then it has all these examples and it's actual, it's modern in a way. So that was interesting to have those both kind of drive the conversation and hammer it down, at least for me.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? All right, I'm gonna stop.
I was wondering about the Jackson Collective and thinking about what they've done, and I wonder if this influenced them or if a lot of that was just organic, but how this
Oh,
tie together.
yeah, the Jackson, Mississippi Cooperative.